Good evening, and tonight on The Primary Source, I'd like to welcome artist and lawyer Chuck von Schmidt. To start things off, Chuck, I wanted to ask you about your interest in art. How long have you had this passion in art?
It's probably pretty much ever since I can remember. I've always been doing, art things. When you first start in school, you're doing little projects and stuff like that. And so I was doing those things, and probably doing little creative things at home also. So it's just always been part of my life.
And now, where do you originally hail from?
Well, I was born in Paducah, Kentucky, but I wasn't really raised there. My parents were from Pittsburgh, and when I was about 3 years old, we moved to Ohio. And then when I was in third grade, we moved down to Miami, and I pretty much grew up in Miami.
Okay. Would you say that influenced the way you learned art at all, or influenced you as a person now?
Well, I'm sure it influenced me as a person, probably not so much in terms of my artistic background. That was probably more of a family thing and just the natural, educational process.
As a young adult moving on to college, how did you continue to build your art skills as you went along?
Well, when I went to college, I got a number of different, part-time jobs in addition to going to school, and I took some art courses, of course, in college. And I didn't take any really, as far as I recall, in high school, because I went to a kind of a prep school, and it was just like a liberal arts kind of education, preparing you for college and all. And but in college, I took some art courses, and I also had some part-time jobs. I was a projectionist for a film classics league, which were the art films of the days, and so that was one of the things I did. Then I also worked on the school newspaper. I went to the University of Florida, and we had a daily newspaper, which had had deadlines of production every day. So I worked on that, and I was doing production work, and I wheedled my way into getting to do some cartoons for, kind of in support of the football team. When they were playing another college, I'd make some kind of a jokey cartoon about them beating up, because we were the Florida Alligators. So you'd always have an alligator biting the tail of a bulldog or something like that. And then I also got to do some advertising cartoons for a local flying school, and I did some of those. And then eventually I became I became the humor editor of the Florida Orange Peel, which was sort of a National Lampoon type magazine that we had at the University of Florida. So I got involved in that sort of stuff right away.
What would you say was your favorite part of continuing your passion for art during college?
Well, it just was all over the place. Like I remember in those days, I was actually doing some painting also. And I remember that was the first time I exhibited anything, in an art exhibit. And I had made a nude painting of a girl standing holding a sign, which was from the behind. So it's just her, just her back and her buttocks and the tops of her legs and stuff, And we put it on an exhibit, and somebody stole it. So since the exhibit was insured, I actually got paid. So that was my first money I made from art.
Quite the sensation.
Yeah.
And after college now, you've done a lot of different things in art. What did you find what did you gravitate towards most?
Well, I was always more of a sculptor than anything else. I made, little carvings and things when I was a kid. And in fact, in high school, I formed a club. I forget, Woodchuck's Club or something like that, but with wood carving. And it's really funny because I had some of my classmates sign up, and we'd sit around and talk about wood carving and stuff like that. And I don't know if they really had any interest in wood carving or not. It was just fun to get together. But I got drafted out of college. When I went to college, I was an architecture major, because it's a kind of combination of seriousness and art. We put together and maybe make a living. But I got drafted out of college, and when I went in the Army, I was sitting and doing sketches between Army BS that they have you doing, and the sergeant saw me doing it. So the next thing I knew, I was painting a mural in the mess hall while everybody else marched out to the rifle range. And then when I went to, I was stationed in Germany. So I went to the company commander, because these people in the Army are all very egotistical. They're trying to outdo each other. So I went to my company commander and I said, look, I'm a sculptor. I can make these beautiful sculptures for the front of the building, you know, and he thought, oh, that'll make me better than the other guys. So he let me do that. So instead of playing Army, I was out there doing sculptures. And I made my first public sculpture in Germany.
Wow. What was it of?
Well, it looked like a kind of a concrete wave. It was about 8 feet tall, made up of 4 beams that curved like a wave. But the interesting part of it was that if you looked at it from 60 degrees above, for instance, if you were some kind of an officer flying over in a helicopter, and if you looked down on it, it was the international peace symbol.
Oh, that's awesome.
I think they must have picked up on it somewhere, because I think it was torn down a few years later.
What else did you do aside from make these wonderful sculptures during your time in the military? Like, what was your assigned position, would you say?
Well, when I first got over there, they assigned me to what was called headquarters company, because I had some, a year and a half of architecture school, so I was a draftsman. So I got into a place. This was a drafting office where we drew up plans for different kinds of things that the Army, wanted. None of which they ever built. It just was make busy work, I thought. And it was interesting because I was the only American soldier in the office, and all the other people were German civilians. And the chief of the office was an American, but he was left over from World War II. And he would come out because he had married a German woman, I think, so he relocated in Germany. And he would come out into the office and complain, "No, this is an American office. I want everybody speaking English," because I was trying to learn German from all my colleagues. So we'd sit and talk German all the time. We drafted up a building that was going to be built out of surplus, like 6-inch steel pipes. And then we're going to weld it all together. And we did all this big, drafting. They never built it. It was, just somebody's crazy idea. So, and they also, it was a really interesting thing too, is they had these great little workshops for people to go to. But I mean workshops and like shops where you could do things. You could go to in after hours. And so I learned how to do centrifugal casting, which is like, it's the way they make jewelry, but I also was making little sculptures doing that. And then there was a ceramics place, and I'd do ceramic pots and stuff like that. And so I kept myself busy.
Taking those skills after your time in the military, what was your path afterwards? How did the military affect your life?
When I was in the military and you got out, you didn't tell anybody.
Well, oh, really?
Oh no, it wasn't very popular. This is the time of the Vietnam War. And I was not a supporter of the war. One of the first things I did when I got out of the Army was go to a peace march in Chicago. So you really didn't. It wasn't until recently that I even kind of admitted that I was a vet, because in those days there was not people didn't look heavily on it. Now they everybody's saying, "Oh, thank you for your service." It's almost embarrassing.
At that point, what did you decide to do with your life? Continue working on art? Like, what direction did you take?
I did. Well, like I said, I was an architecture major when I was drafted. And when I got out of the Army, I said, look, I've already been through all this. There's no sense in me trying to have some kind of a serious, business kind of career. Let me just be an artist, which is what I really wanted to be. And so when I got out and I went to just a community college to start with, because that was a way of getting out of the Army early. But I took art courses there. And I befriended a fellow who commissioned me to do several things. I made a big stained glass window for him, and I made a painting. And you may have heard of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Actually, the 4 books, because the first one was The Hobbit. And I was very fond of that. I read it when I was in the Army. And so I made a painting of Bilbo Baggins sitting on side of the hill with little mushrooms and stuff around and stuff like that for him.
That's amazing. What sources of material have you really found inspiration from?
Well, you know, being a sculptor, I was just absolutely fascinated by every kind of material. I started off in wood because that was, you know, what carpenters work with and cabinet makers. And then for a while, I was a cabinet maker. But then, and it's really kind of funny because as a young man or as a kid, I had pyrophobia. If somebody would light a match near me, I would, you know, startle and it went back to when I was an infant or something. But it was an interesting thing that when I went to Cooper Union, I learned how to weld. And that's when I got rid of the pyrophobia because like you're right there, you got your face right in the fire, you know, you got to get over it. So, and we did all kinds of, you know, every kind of material and stuff, bronze casting. And I built a large centrifugal caster for Cooper Union for the sculpture department when I was there. I learned lathe work. Well, I actually learned lathe work when I was a little kid. In junior high, they had summer programs where you could go in and work in workshop, and they had a metal lathe there. So everybody would make cannons on the metal lathe and then try to sneak boring them out when the instructor wasn't looking.
What is metal lathing? Just because I honestly don't know what it is.
It's a machine where you take a piece of round metal stock and you put it in the machine, and the machine turns, and you put a tool against it, and it carves it into whatever shape you want. So if you, for instance, you look at those spindles on a banister going up the stairs, those are turned on a wood lathe. So see, it's repetitive circular carving.
I gotcha.
Did all kinds of things like that. I did, you know, like I said, bronze casting. I made films. I made a like stop camera action film of Leonardo da Vinci's drawings, and I made another. Wasn't a feature length film. It was only about 10 or 15 minutes long, but I made a film where it was filmed in 8mm at that time. It's not like digital where you have now. It actually had film stock where we had to cut it and splice it together and stuff like that. So a friend of mine from the Army and I went upstate and filmed this movie up in the woods. It was really kind of fun.
Yeah. What was the focus of the movie?
It was really kind of like a fantasy movie that it starts off with my friend drinking a glass of water, and then it cuts into him driving up in the country and going out through the woods and stuff like that. And then it ends with him putting the glass of water down. So it was all just like the sort of daydream he had while he was drinking the glass of water.
It sounds like such an amazing piece to watch.
I enjoyed it, but I'm not so sure how good it was.
How easy would you say modern technology has made film production and all the artistry that you've done? How easy would you say modern technology has made it?
Well, just to address the idea of filmmaking, at first, like I said, the first film I made was with 8mm, and you know had to splice the film together and stuff like that. Later, shortly after that, they developed these what were called porta-packs. It was a 3/4 inch, tape, reel-to-reel tape that you would have a recording device that was about 14 inches square and about 8 inches thick that you'd carry in a little backpack, and then have a camera that was about, you know, a foot long, weighed about 5 or 10 pounds, and you'd carry that around and you'd make these videotapes. But since it was so easy to do that, you could shoot hours and hours and hours of tape. I think it became a learning curve for people to learn how to be disciplined in what they were shooting.
Now, to change gears, as a Cooper Union alum, how would you describe your experience there? How did it affect your life after college and your military experiences?
You know, Cooper Union was a great experience. It was one of the best art schools. I worked with you know, some pretty famous artists, some very good artists, and it was a really great development in terms of you know, what I learned there. Also, I also worked for a very good sculptor prior to going to Cooper Union, who was a great portrait sculptor. And I learned how to do that sort of stuff. So I could do portraits, sculptor portraits and things too.
What's
But
a sculptor portrait, just out of curiosity?
like a bust of, somebody's head.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So if you go into the museums and you see these bronzes or marbles that looks supposed to be somebody,
Yeah.
sorts of things. Yeah. So after Cooper Union, well, while I was at Cooper Union, I actually worked there. I got on staff, and since I'd been to a number of different colleges, I actually stopped taking classes the semester before I graduated, and was just working at Cooper Union. At the same time, I had my own loft, which is a studio, and I was making sculptures and cabinets and stuff in that. So after I graduated from Cooper, I worked there for a couple of years. And since it was only part-time, there was a job offered at Brooklyn College, which was full-time. So I took that and went over there and worked in the sculpture department there. So that didn't pay a lot of money, and I was looking for a job at another college that perhaps paid a little bit more money, and just was not finding anything. And my wife said, "Well, why don't you go to law school? You like to argue." And I said, "No, I don't." So I ended up going to law school, because so many artists, you have to have a day job because it's very hard to make a living as an artist. Some people can do it, but not many. So most artists have day jobs. Many famous artists were teachers and things. And I just ended up, instead of driving a cab or waiting on tables, I ended up going to law school and becoming a lawyer.
Would you say your skills in art had transferability to working in law?
Yeah, I believe so. A lot when I was interviewing to go to law school, people would say to me, "How can this be? Like you're an artist, you want to be a lawyer? What's the connection?" I said, "Well, look, they're both problem solving. An artist simply invents his own question and solves it, and the solution is the artwork. Whereas if you're in law, the question's presented to you. You have to solve it. So it's really just kind of a similar, to me, it was a similar, intellectual discipline."
What sort of law did you focus on as a lawyer?
Interestingly, when I was in law school, they said, where do you see yourself 5 years from? And I said, well, anywhere but criminal law. And the first job I got getting out of law school was in the DA's office. So I was a prosecutor for 4 or 5 years. And then I knew a judge who wanted me to be his law clerk, so I went and worked for him for a couple of years. And that was very interesting because you learn all kinds of every type of law that would come across the judge's bench, across his desk would something I'd be exposed to. So that was a very good experience. And after that, I went to do medical malpractice defense, which was also very interesting because you learn all about medicine and operations and things that doctors do right and wrong. And then I just went into my own general practice, working for myself for the longest period of time, and a little bit of everything, but mostly I did criminal defense.
What would you say brought you towards criminal every time? Like you started to stray away, but you'd eventually always come back. What do you think was the thing that brought you back to it every time?
I just found it I found it easy. So I was taking the lazy way out. And if you asked me to do tax or something like that, I'd faint. It was always very interesting because you're always looking in the paper to see if my case is there because it was those kinds of things.
Wow. Yeah.
Like how people like to watch crime programs and stuff, but this was living.
What were some of the cases you worked like? What would you say was your most notable case, if you're allowed to talk about it?
I have to say it was a capital murder case.
Oh my.
In 1995, when the governor pushed through this capital murder statute, someone suggested that I get involved in it because what happened is that you had to be specially trained in order to defend those cases. They had a whole, the DA's office, the prosecutors, they already were geared up to do it. But there were certain things you had to learn to do the defense. So I got qualified to do that. And I think I was one of the first guys out here in Suffolk County. I got involved in a couple of cases. And then, as it turned out, there was a case that was going to trial, and there was a conflict between one of the attorneys and the defendant. And the other attorney had inquired if I would be interested in stepping in. I said, sure, I'll do it. And next thing I knew, I got a call from the judge, and he said, would you take this to the other guy's place because he's recusing himself from the case? So I did, and they had already picked a jury, and they were ready to start the trial. And of course, the judge says, I'm not going to give you any adjournment. And I said, oh, of course not, Judge. And as soon as he appoints me, I said, Judge, I need an adjournment. But we ended up going to trial, and it was, the whole process was very interesting because normally in criminal defense, you don't have a lot of resources to build up your defense. But in capital defense, the state was paying for the defense. So we had the opportunity to hire all kinds of experts, do all kinds of special tests, and whatever it was we needed to do for the defense. But it was an entirely losing case because they had DNA evidence that was overwhelming. So the guy was convicted. And then there's a second phase to the trial, which is the penalty phase. And in that, the state argues for the death penalty, and we argue against it. And there was a little aspect of the whole process that my co-counsel and I said, if anything is going to save this case, this will do it. And sure enough, we had asked for a certain charge to the jury. When the jury is sent out to make their deliberations, the judge reads them the law, instructs them on how to do their deliberations. We had made a certain kind of request that the jury be charged in a certain way, and the judge refused to do it. Well, they came back, they found for the death penalty, and the guy was sentenced to death. And he was up on death row in Dannemora. Well, the case went up on appeal, and when it went before the Court of Appeals in the state of New York, the Court of Appeals agreed with the idea that my co-counsel and I had argued, that this was wrong for the judge not to charge this particular aspect that we wanted him to charge. And they said the death penalties, for that reason, the death penalty is unconstitutional. And they didn't reverse his conviction, but they reversed the penalty part. So now he's in jail, without parole for the rest of his life. The New York State death penalty is unconstitutional, and nobody else has been charged under it.
Now, to bring to more modern day, what is some of the work you're pursuing now?
Yeah, I've kind of a limited practice. Once in a while, an old client will come back to me and ask me to do things. But most of the work I'm doing right now is guardianship. And that's, I'm working with the guardianship court with people who most of they're adults who have, for one reason or another, incapacity that they can't take care of their own affairs. It's usually somebody who's older and they're, getting dementia or maybe Alzheimer's or something, and they can't pay their own bills. Maybe they can't drive. Maybe they can't remember to take their medicines. So I've been involved in those types of cases, from everything from investigating the case for the court, or to representing the person as a lawyer, and for a couple of people, I'm their guardian.
What does this being a guardian of someone entail, I guess?
Well, like for instance, I have to pay their bills. With their money. I make a bank account that I have control over, and I pay their bills. If they need to go to the hospital, maybe or that somebody calls me from the hospital and say, can you consent to this procedure? Since they're not able to do it themselves, I do it for them. If they need to go out, and after they leave the hospital, they go to rehab, they go to a place to live, I make those arrangements for them.
Taking all your experience in law and art, what would you say, across any career, what would you say is some of the most important skills for someone to build?
Well, you have, I guess, what's interchangeable in all disciplines is applying yourself, having patience. That's one of the things about, I guess, that's most transferable between art and law, and that is that you have to have patience. You know, people work on when you work on an artwork, you have to have a lot of patience to work on it hour after hour after hour. And I think the same thing applies like for the law. It's not something you do quickly and without thought and preparation. And the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. And in both instances.
I see. Now, specifically for each law and art, what would you say is for someone who wants to build a practice or wants to make their name known in the art world, what would you say would be the way for them to do that?
Well, you know, I think the first thing is to be good at what you're doing. Try to be the best in anything. You know, in art, they say, you know, you should try to make your work interesting, so that someone looks at it and says, "Oh, I like that," you know, and they'll continue to have interest in you and in your art. In law, of course, you want to be good. You want to be able, if you're representing somebody, whether it's defending them in a criminal matter or prosecuting something for them. Let's say somebody who's like has an injury and they want to get money for their injury. You know, if you get the money, that makes you happy. It makes them happy. And same thing with like you know, whatever you do to try to be good at it. And some people practice these professions and just like model along, make an adequate living, and you know, they're happy with it. But if you have your own personal goals of being the best you can possibly be, you have a better chance of success, I guess. If nothing else, you make yourself happy.
Would you say that career fulfillment is extremely important in both of these professions?
I think if you're talking about personal feeling, a feeling of personal fulfillment, I think it's important in life. You know, why should you work at a job that you don't enjoy? Why should you go to work someplace where you say, "I can't wait till I go home tonight"? The best thing you can hear from anybody, and I hear this from lawyers, and I enjoy doing law work also, but I more enjoy doing art. And so somebody who says, "I don't consider what I'm doing work, I enjoy going and doing what I do," that's the best thing. And that's, you know, you're going to live your life like that.
Thank you for the wonderful advice. What would you say was one of your favorite accomplishments in art that you did, one of your most significant to you?
In 2004, I was commissioned to make a sculpture for the Pope. And I did. And in 2005, in January, I went to Rome and was honored to personally present it to him. So that was pretty neat.
What was the sculpture of?
It was a pair of hands holding a globe, and it was cast in glass. So I modeled a pair of hands, made a mold of it, went to a place where we did casting, and I worked with another guy who helped me cast it. We cast it in glass, and then I finished it up and took it over to Rome and gave it to him. It was a private audience of about 160 people in the Vatican, in this beautiful, you know, Renaissance room. And the Pope came in and talked to us and stuff, and everybody went up and you know, greeted him, and I got to go up and give him the sculpture.
If you had to say, like, what message do you usually try to bring with your art?
I'm very interested in the human condition. What we're involved in here is we are living on the earth for this short period of time. Our interaction with the earth, which means nature and weather and all that sort of you know, stuff, because we're not isolated from our environment. We're part of it, and we're products of our environment. And enjoying that and celebrating that is what I think my art's mostly about.
Speaking on these themes, would you say that your Dave Brubeck's hand casting embodies this?
Oh yes, I have. I made Dave Brubeck a number of years back, and it was some kind of a special dinner thing in New York City, and I got tickets from another guy who said he didn't even know who Dave Brubeck was. So I'll go. So we went, and we were honored to have dinner with him. I mean, it was like, like 80 people or so, but like we were all hanging around and talking and stuff. And so we got a chance to talk with him for a couple of minutes. And I said, Mr. Brubeck, your hands are the most incredible hands. They're very expressive and beautiful. And I said, I'm a sculptor. Would you pose for me so I'd like to make a sculpture of your hands? And he said, sure. So about a year later, I wrote him a letter and I said, remember you promised I could do this. And he says, okay, contact my assistant. So I contacted his assistant and we set up a date. And I drove up to, I think he lived near Fairfield, Connecticut. And I drove up to his house and I went in there and his assistant said, how'd you get him to do this? He never does anything like this. And I said, I don't know. And I spent an hour or two with him making models that I could work from. And we were chatting, and he was just a wonderful guy. And like I said, his hands were just incredibly expressive. They were really great.
Though you two are from different art professions, would you say that it was very easy for you two to converse, just to respect each other's arts?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Like you're an artist and he was a musician. Would you say that you were both able to connect on that sort of level? It was a connection that really brought you two together?
Well, I think probably, yeah, exactly. I mean, for instance, he was a very generous man, both in his what he did with his art. He did so much for making jazz accessible to people who weren't jazz fanatics. Almost everybody knows Take Five. It's people that don't spend a lot of time listening to Coltrane or some of those other guys, they know Dave Brubeck. So he was generous with his gift to people in general with what he did. And he was certainly very generous with me, allowing me to interact with him and make the sculpture.
Similarly, thank you for being so generous with your time, Mr. von Schmidt. If you'd like to check out Mr. von Schmidt's work, find him at www.von-schmidt.com, which is linked in the description below. There you can find the Dave Brubeck piece along with many others we didn't mention. Thanks for watching, everybody, and please remember to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you don't miss any new videos. If you want to follow the primary source for more career, financial, or success advice, check me out on Instagram at @TheRealPrimarySource. Have a fantastic January, and I'll be back again next month.